60 years ago, a Cold War fired up a space race between the Soviet Union and the United States.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
For decades, national policy and NASA technology drove the US space program. Now, billionaires lead the way.
T-minus 10, 9.
It's a new dawn
and new race
for space.
Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX.
Hello, I'm Ed Ludlow.
And I'm Alix. Over the next half hour, we'll explore the multi-billion-dollar 21st century space industry. Private companies are setting their goals higher and reaching them even faster, while governments around the world are pouring resources into research and development, training, and technology. But before we can understand where this is all going, we have to look at how we got here.
7, 6, 5, 1 for main engine start.
NASA's Space Shuttle program was a shining new phase in America's journey to the stars. The goal? Reusable rockets ferrying astronauts and cargo into orbit for decades.
Roger, Columbia.
At first, it did just that. Launches and landings became routine, and space just another destination, until the Challenger.
Oh my gosh.
The program just couldn't shake safety concerns, and disaster struck again in 2003 when the shuttle Columbia disintegrated upon re-entry, killing everyone aboard.
We had to do our mourning, but very, very, very tough situation. Lots of crying, lots of crying.
When the US shuttle program was shut down in 2011, the government officially portrayed it as a redirection of NASA's focus towards deep space exploration.
I have been pushing NASA to revamp its vision. Now what we need is that next technological breakthrough.
Space is really a hard thing to do. And I think one of the issues we'd had with our stakeholders was NASA wasn't really allowed to fail.
In reality, turning around reusable rockets took a lot of time, and flying into space just cost a lot of money. The U.S. spent $290 billion in today's dollars on the Gemini and Apollo programs that put the first man on the moon. And by the time the shuttle program ended, it was costing the government nearly $1.6 billion per flight.
President, welcome aboard the International Space Station.
The hope, by shifting NASA's focus into deep space, the financial burden of supporting the International Space Station would move to private companies. Cue Elon Musk.
It's an amazing day, I think, for space as a whole, for the space industry.
Even before he founded Tesla, Musk had set his eyes on space. He launched the company Spacex in 2002 with the idea of reusing rockets to reduce the cost and doing it better.
You can fly and refly an orbit-class booster, which is the most expensive part of the rocket. This is going to be ultimately a huge revolution in spaceflight.
SpaceX, along with Boeing, secured $6.8 billion in NASA contracts to help fly U.S. astronauts into space.
2 heads are better than 1. And honestly, getting like 400 of them is even better.
In 2012, Musk's SpaceX launched its Dragon spacecraft, the first commercial vehicle to deliver cargo to and from the International Space Station. And in 2020, Dragon carried a NASA crew to ISS for just $55 million per seat, 20% less than Russia was charging the US for the same service.
And SpaceX isn't alone. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin was among several companies that received NASA funding to develop spaceflight technology, marking the next giant leap in commercializing space.
It's been just 11 years since U.S. Senators Bill Nelson and Kay Bailey Hutchinson passed legislation paving the way for NASA and the private sector to work together on space missions. Nelson now serves as NASA administrator and once flew a mission into space on the shuttle Columbia. He believes a program that has stalled is once again poised to soar.
We're going to see another incredible leap, that going back to the moon in preparation to venture out into the cosmos. Artemis, the vehicle, the SLS, will take our astronauts to lunar orbit. There they will transfer into a commercial vehicle, and that will go down to the surface of the moon. They'll do their activities, come back, and the spacecraft called Orion will return to Earth. So you see a combination of everything, public-private partnership.
In theory, it's a perfect combination. NASA's expertise and experience infused with creativity and capital from big companies and billionaires.
20 years ago, we were worried about our space industry. I'm not worried about that anymore.
Kathy Leaders has worked for NASA for nearly 30 years and now heads its human spaceflight office.
My vision of the future is that NASA's a multiplier. So that's really our goal, is to be the ultimate tech transfer and be able to take our knowledge of human spaceflight and be able to share with them what the nation's invested in us.
A big player in NASA's past, present, and future is Boeing. The aircraft giant has worked with the space agency since helping put Americans on the moon 50 years ago.
NASA will embark on big projects. It's not that they don't do satellites and other things at smaller scale, but they'll embark on moon landings. We have always aspired to be part of those big projects.
Jim Chilton has been at Boeing for 37 years and now leads the company's space and launch division. He says there's room for companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin to complement what Boeing brings to the race for space.
I think their business model is very different than a big publicly traded Boeing. Those companies are focused on one mission, and they're taking a very long cycle view of it. It's in the public domain that Mr. Bezos has said, I'll put $1 billion a year into Blue Origin. They're willing to dig in, focus their company somewhat more narrowly than Boeing's portfolio on that, and make it happen.
So now we have big publicly traded companies, entrepreneurs, governments, and investors all eager to get in on the action. Coming up, the money that drives the space race. Where does it come from, and how far can it take us in the industry?
We think the potential is, and pardon the pun, astronomical. And if there's one industry that could rival the internet in terms of how transformative it was and how much value was created and redistributed, space is on that short list of industries.
This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to this Bloomberg Special Report Space Race. I'm Alix Steele.
And I'm Ed Ludlow. Investors have poured nearly $200 billion into more than 1,500 space companies over the last 10 years, dwarfing the contracts awarded by NASA and other space agencies.
You might see the first trillionaire be a space-based business or be derived on that.
Morgan Stanley's Adam Jonas, who covers the auto sector, is one of the top analysts tracking the space race. And like everybody else, he is pumped.
I think that it would be very difficult in 10 or 20 years to imagine key businesses and ecosystems without the space backbone.
One thing that helped reignite investor interest in space.
Command and start. 2, 1.
Billionaires traveling to the stars.
On how it felt? Oh my God! My expectations were high and they were dramatically exceeded.
Amazon founder Jeff Bezos traveled aboard Blue Origin's first flight to space on July 20th.
Earth's atmosphere, it's so big, we live in it, and it seems gigantic, but when you get up there, you see that it's actually this teensy little thing that we need to protect. So, I don't know, for me, it was definitely incredible.
It was a key milestone in the company's effort to make space tourism viable and entice super wealthy customers to pay big money for a unique travel experience.
Space tourism is investable, it is sexy, but we think that the main value of space tourism, just in our team's opinion, is where it can go from here.
Bezos is not the only billionaire sending himself into space. On July 11th, Virgin Galactic founder Richard Branson made the journey to the stars. He sees space as a tourist destination, with his space line deploying reusable systems to shuttle customers back and forth to experience just a few minutes of weightlessness. I spoke with Branson just after he completed his flight.
I've always sort of pictured what it was going to be like. I mean, like the ride up there, the ride back, and I never realized that the whole experience was going to be so vivid. Woo!
One of the earliest and most active investors was Chad Anderson. His company has tracked the cash flowing in and out of space for years. He believes there's a lot more to come.
Early on, we had some wealthy individuals who were very excited about the potential of space technology, and invested their own money, helped kick things off and get things started. The government played a key role early on in being an early funder and an early customer. And then venture capital firms got very excited about the opportunity, not just for rockets and satellites, but from the data that comes from those technologies. And today, we're seeing a lot of retail interest.
Money that once went primarily into rocket companies is being spread around more broadly as space startups join the SPAC wave. Mark Boggett's venture firm Seraphim Capital has been chasing space investments for more than 15 years. He says SPACs have helped accelerate the space race.
Most of these private companies are raising money annually in order to build out their operations. And it takes at least a quarter, if not two, for the management teams to engage with the private investors and to access the capital. So that takes a lot of serious management time off the business, focused on fundraising. So with SPACs, where these companies are raising larger sums of money, $300, $400, $500 million, which are really bringing forward some of their future rounds to now, it's a lot more efficient. So I think we've got many more space SPACs to come during the course of 2021.
Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs, brought another way for investors to tap into space. Over the past 3 years, a handful of space-themed ETFs have launched in North America and Europe that now hold about $800 million between them.
These vehicles are very much focused on the traditional space market because that's where most of the listed companies are. The new space market, the majority of the companies remain private.
The highest profile of that bunch is Cathie Wood and ARC's Space Exploration and Innovation ETF. Since launching in March, the fund has attracted more than $550 million of flows.
That ETF is an interesting one because when they launched it, it had a handful of the defense contractors that you would normally think of, the infrastructure companies that most people associate with space, but their largest holding is Trimble. And Trimble is a distribution company that brought us the first GPS receivers in the 80s.
Outside of the US, the funds are younger and smaller. Products like the Procure Space UCITS ETF in London and the Harvest Space Innovation ETF in Canada have attracted just a few $1 million after launching in the second quarter. And new products are launching every day.
We've recently launched the Seraphim Space Investment Trust on the UK London Stock Exchange. And that's a vehicle that we're targeting 20% per annum return over the longer term.
The bulk of the money is still in companies like Spacex. A recent funding round raised over $1 billion from investors, including Fidelity Investments and Sequoia Capital. That round valued the company at $74 billion, according to Bloomberg. And it comes as Elon Musk promises to build out the ambitious Starlink network. Think thousands of connected satellites that can do revolutionary things like bring broadband services to millions, track refugees, and fight climate change while spotting storms before they get to catastrophic levels.
We have all these satellites that are orbiting our planet and gathering all this really valuable information. And we are just now beginning to harness that information, distribute that information. We're in a very similar place in geospatial intelligence as we were at the GPS. In the late 80s, early 90s. And so we see an equal amount of opportunity here for investors to make returns.
Investors are captivated by Starlink's potential to pay off, but the program will cost a lot of money. The total investment will be between $5 and $10 billion before the company is cash flow positive.
Step number one for Starlink is don't go bankrupt. That is, if we succeed in not going bankrupt, then that'll be great, and we can move on from there.
Musk says $20 to $30 billion could be needed to attain the goal of offering broadband to as much as 5% of the world's population, beyond the reach of conventional networks. The service has more than 69,000 active users and aims to quintuple that over the next year.
We think that the comms message there is much bigger, and the market is potentially much bigger than just providing internet to areas of the earth where there's unreliable or no internet service. That's certainly part of it, and there's a good ESG message there too. But we think by developing these orbits for high bandwidth, low latency communication, that will unlock things like urban air mobility and eVTOL, flying cars.
Blue Origin also has plans to compete in the satellite internet sector. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft have all invested heavily in cloud capabilities beamed in from beyond Earth's atmosphere. Morgan Stanley says it's largely this growth in space-based internet and data services that will drive the space industry to more than $1 trillion by 2040.
That's a fairly conservative 4 or 5% growth rate from the $400 billion space economy we are today. We think we're just scratching the surface. The hard part, Alex, will be not just the direct impact that space has on industry, but the indirect, right? So if you are able to turn on continents and open up more connectivity to not just homes, but vehicles, cars, ships, planes, everything that moves, as a second derivative, you may be opening up multiples of that $1 trillion number that wouldn't have been turned on if it weren't for the space comms. And that's just the comm side. Then you throw in transportation and EO, Earth observation, and we think we're being fairly conservative with that number.
Coming up, from profits to politics, there's more than just money on the line in the race for space.
It's great that we have billionaires that thinks, space is cool and they want to put money into it. It's also important that we continue to recognize that this is a strategic capability for our nation.
This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg's Space Race. I'm Ed Ludlow.
And I'm Alix Steele. The race for space isn't just a battle among billionaires or a contest for investors. It's a competition between countries.
We think that a very important aspect of the space economy, from both the dollars and cents and the TAM, but also from the national security aspect, is what China's doing in space. And they've made it a very big priority to develop their capabilities in space.
Russia and China recognized a decade ago our dependency and advantage in space and have been investing billions of dollars and a great deal of energy in applying their space technology to space warfare. And to be blunt about it, anti-satellite weaponry. We have not done that.
Tori Bruno is the president and CEO of United Launch Alliance, or ULA, a joint venture formed 15 years ago between Boeing and Lockheed Martin to provide launch services for government and commercial customers. Its track record is 140 successful launches and 0 failures.
We've always had this peaceful high ground where we could cooperate in space, we could use space in various ways, and the assets were never under threat. And today, I'm here to tell you that they absolutely are under threat. Russia and China have developed a wide variety of anti-satellite weapons that are in fact already deployed.
Many analysts forecast that the militarization of space will become a major source of growth in the sector as the US expands its budget for defense research and development with the advent of its new Space Force.
I think some military applications in space are somewhat inevitable.
98% of all weapons ordnance, according to our aerospace and defense team, is space dependent. And we think, at least this so far, that this is apolitical. That regardless of the administration, space is seen as existential.
Space is now a warfighting domain. We haven't had a new warfighting domain in 100 years, since World War I, when air was introduced. That's a major sea state change.
In the near term, the moon is critical territory as countries jockey for strategic advantages in space. The next big prize is Mars, but getting there is more challenging.
Mars is a long way off. The moon is only 3 days off. Mars, if you go with conventional propulsion, you're talking about 8-10 months to get there, at least a year to stay on the surface, and then 8 to 10 months coming back. That's a long time.
How do we make sure we can keep our people physically and psychologically well on the journey. There's going to be a lot of learning going through all those aspects of the mission that then gets us ready for this 3-year mission, 3 years going all the way to Mars and then having somebody safely come back. I want to try that out on the moon first before I send people to Mars.
While countries race towards the moon and Mars, it may not be long before the rest of us have our chance to go to space.
Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic recently received full approval from the FAA to take commercial customers to space.
Sold 20.
A seat on Blue Origin's 11-minute New Shepard spaceflight sold at auction for $28 million. And for a fraction of that price, a company called Space Perspective will offer 6-hour rides over the stratosphere in a luxury balloon. Book now for trips starting in 2024. The first space hotel, Voyager Station, is in the planning stages, and passengers might someday arrive there on Boeing's Starliner.
Should people want to maybe have their own capsule in their own livery, like we sell airplanes, we think there's all kinds of business possibilities in the future.
So when we think of space tourism, we think of it in two ways. How could it then parlay into transportation? That's where we find there's the most investor interest, and if you're willing to surrender to the long horizon needed to see it through, where they may be the greatest reward. But the other factor of space tourism is the public support, the visibility of live streaming these events and getting the general public behind it and getting our children interested in it.
And then there's Elon Musk's Starship project, which investor Chad Anderson thinks could be a game changer.
This is a vehicle that is fully reusable and is enormous. It can take so much capacity to orbit. It can be refueled in orbit and go into farther destinations. This is the vehicle that's going to take us to the moon, likely before NASA is able to do that.
The Starship can carry 100 metric tons and as many as 100 passengers. It's 160 feet high with a 30-foot diameter.
It's an enormous vehicle, and it's so low cost. I mean, they're talking about a cost of like $5 million per launch. When Starship comes online, I mean, this is an enormous vehicle that you could pay to outfit in whatever way you want, bring up all of your friends and family and do, and have a hotel in space, stay for as long as you want and come back down. Or medical, research institutions, whatever, can outfit it however they want, pay to outfit it and launch it. And it seems like you could do that and still save money based on what we're doing today.
Space is the kind of topic that turns hard-nosed investors into wide-eyed fans. We hope that you enjoyed our exploration of the business of space. Stay tuned to Bloomberg Television and Radio for continuing coverage of the space race. And of course, visit Bloomberg.com for 24/7 news and analysis. I'm Alix Steele.
And I'm Ed Ludlow.
This is Bloomberg.